Okay, hello and welcome to lesson 5 of theme 5, GCSE geography. We're going to be taking what we learnt about anticyclones last lesson and applying it to a region of the world called the Sahel. This is a band of very arid climate, that means very dry climate, that runs between the Sahara Desert in northern Africa and the savanna African grassland just beneath it. People here really struggle to survive. All of the countries in this region are LICs, low-income countries. So we're going to look at how anticyclones, as well as other factors, create drought conditions that lead to desertification. We're going to look at what the definitions of those key terms are. We're going to look at the causes and effects of those two things, and then look at how we can sustainably manage desertification in the region, because it's making life very hard for the people that live there. So go ahead and pause the video a second and put this main title down in your books for today. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is define drought and desertification. Now, you will have heard of drought before, but desertification is potentially a brand new word. So drought is it's a prolonged period of below average rainfall. So whatever that area is supposed to get for that time of year, if for a sustained period of time there is less than that amount of precipitation falling, then you're into a period of drought. Now, desertification, it starts with the word desert. All right. Desertification is the process of land becoming exhausted of nutrients, exhausted of moisture, and turning to desert, really. And one of the things that can cause land to turn to desert is drought. There are other factors that we'll look into today as well. We're going to be using the word arid as well. So in case you're not sure what that means, I've put that down as well. So pause the video here for a moment and put down those 3 key terms underneath your main title. Okay, so I've mentioned the Sahel region, but where and what exactly is it? So here are a couple of maps to help you visualize what I'm talking about. So this is the continent of Africa. There's the Mediterranean Sea, so that's Spain, the UK would be up there. This is the Sahara Desert, covering pretty much the whole of northern Africa. You've got the Congo rainforest in the middle. And then running along here, this is the African savanna grassland. We're going to look at that ecosystem later on. This area here is the arid Sahel region. It runs over almost 8,000 kilometers from west to east across northern Africa, between the Sahara Desert to the north and the savanna grasslands to the south. It covers countries such as Mauritania, Mali, Nigeria, Chad, Sudan, Eritrea. All of these countries are LICs. And as is common with LICs, politically they don't really, as a rule, get on with each other. I'm going to be coming back to that point later on, because that becomes important when we start to look at how we could reduce desertification in the region. These countries need to make agreements across the whole Sahel region, and that's very difficult to do, because politically they do not see eye to eye. But that's the area we're talking about when I say the Sahel. Very wide band of very dry climate, almost desert, but not quite yet. It's very arid, though very dry. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is drought. What can cause there to be below average rainfall for a prolonged period of time? Now, there's a video in the lesson folder. I'd like you to watch that video up to 2 minutes 16 seconds and then pause it, and then come back to this point in this recording, and we'll make a spider diagram or bullet point list, if you prefer, on the main causes of drought. So pause this video here a minute, go to the other video, have a look at it up to 2 minutes 16 seconds, and then come back and we'll walk through it. Okay, so there are 4 main reasons why you might not get as much rainfall as usual over a period of time. The first one is an anticyclone. A prolonged period of high pressure hangs around longer than normal, and as we know from last lesson, anticyclones are high pressure. The air is sinking, pressing down on the Earth's surface, and remember from atmospheric circulation, sinking air cannot make a cloud. If there's no clouds, you're not going to get any rain, you're not going to get any precipitation. In addition to that, you're going to get high temperatures that go along with that, especially in the Sahel region. You're very close to the equator, the sun's rays are very concentrated, and that means that any moisture that is in the area, rivers, lakes, streams, pools, you're going to get a lot of evaporation loss. You're going to lose water from that region. Furthermore, you then add humans into the mix, and we love to cut down trees for various reasons, whether that's urbanization, whether it's fuel wood, building materials, whether it's to clear land for agriculture. And if we remove those trees, it breaks the water cycle. Trees, if you remember, they release moisture into the air. That's called transpiration. If there's less moisture in the air, fewer clouds are going to form. And if there's fewer clouds, there'll be less precipitation. Finally, climate change. Okay, warming atmospheric temperatures are going to exacerbate all of these three things, going to make them worse, and they're going to have that effect on arid areas even more so. So put a subheading or a bubble for a spider diagram, causes of drought, and put down those four things, either as bullet points or as little things coming off your spider diagram, however you prefer to lay it out. So pause the video here a moment and do that quickly. Okay, so the next thing to look at is, how does drought cause a problem? What are the effects of drought for people in the region? So if you go back to the video that's in the folder and watch it from 2 minutes 16 seconds to the end, and then we'll do the same as we've just done for the causes of drought, but this time for the effects. Pause this video here a minute, watch the other video to the end, and then we'll come back and we'll spider diagram or bullet point list the effects of drought. How does it affect people and the environment? Okay, so you've got a few things going on here. First of all, obviously the soil will dry out. If there's not precipitation falling to recharge the soil moisture, to put water back into the soil, then the top layer can become dried out and cracked and turn to dust and be blown away by the wind, or when rain does arrive, it gets washed away by the surface runoff. If you remember, the breaking down and removal of material, that's called erosion. And soil erosion is a big problem because it's the top layer of soil that contains most of the nutrients. So if the soil has dried out, broken up and been blown or washed away, that soil erosion means the land then turns to desert. You haven't got that fertile layer of topsoil there anymore. And that damage is permanent. You cannot reverse it. You cannot fix it. So the land has now turned to desert. Desertification starts to kick in. In addition, you've got, well, if it's that tough to survive in that area, there's not enough water falling to drink, to water your crops, to keep your livestock alive, then people are going to leave. It's far too difficult to survive here. And they go to areas where it's easier to survive. But the problem is, of course, there's usually somebody living there already. So that creates a lot of conflict and overcrowding. Even civil war and tribal conflict is a big problem. Also, if there's not enough rain, like I just touched upon, crops and livestock are going to die. And that's going to mean there's not enough food to go around. We call that famine. And if people are starving, they're going to die. So that's going to increase your death rate as well. In addition to that, though, if the crops and livestock are dying, farmers in LICs have got nothing to sell. So they've got no money coming in to support their families. Their standard of living is going to decrease. And finally, you've got the issue of if there's not enough water falling, then humans are going to be forced to drink what little water there is. And that's usually in the form of contaminated rivers and streams that animals also bathe in. They also wash in there, pee and poo in there, defecate in there. So that's going to mean that diseases such as cholera are going to spread really, really easily. And with lack of healthcare, that's going to kill people. Even diarrhea, believe it or not, in LICs, it will dehydrate you so much and your body just can't get the nutrients it needs. Diarrhea kills children in these countries because they're forced to drink contaminated water. So your death rate is going to go through the roof as well. So It has an economic impact. You've got nothing to sell. It has a social impact. You've got nothing to drink. You've got nothing to eat. You're going to starve. You're going to contract diseases. And it has an environmental impact as well. You've got this soil erosion going on. Just, yeah, triple whammy. So these images for this lesson, there is an accompanying sheet that has all these images on. So if you're like me and you're quite a visual learner and you want to cut and stick the pictures down as you're going to accompany your notes, then by all means do so if you're lucky enough to have a printer at home. If not, option A, just don't put pictures. Option B, have a look at the resource sheet, roughly leave the right size gap, and I can always give them to you when we get back. So pause the video here a minute, either a subheading with bullet points or a spider diagram with notes as I've laid it out here. Get the effects of drought down into your books. Okay, so what we're going to move on to now, that's causes and effects of drought. And we've started to mention that one of the effects of drought is the land will turn to desert. And that will make all of these other problems even worse. Because once that's happened, you can't reverse it. It's a permanent change. It's what we call a tipping point, actually. So we're going to look into desertification in a little bit more detail. Yes, you can't stop an anticyclone. It's a natural phenomenon. High pressure weather systems will continue to happen. They have always happened. So an anticyclone bringing dry weather is a natural cause of drought that can lead to desertification. But desertification has become more of a problem because we've got humans in the mix. So put a subheading, how does the land turn to desert? Desertification. Now please, 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 you'll notice desert and desertification, they only have one S. Do not spell it with two S's. That is dessert. That is pudding. Okay? So please pay attention to your spelling with these key terms. So the first reason that land turns to desert is the natural one that we've touched upon already. We can't change anticyclones. They've always happened and will continue to happen, although they're becoming more common in already hot climates due to climate change. So that's your main natural cause of desertification. If an anticyclone goes on too long, you get a prolonged period of very dry weather. When you throw humans into the mix, especially in areas of the world where it's marginal survival, you're right on the edges of what is livable, especially in LICs and low-income countries. For example, most of the population there are going to be employed as farmers. Due to lack of education, they can't access other job opportunities. You work in agriculture. Now, the thing with agriculture in the Sahel is nomadic traditions, plus the fact that LIC farmers can't really afford fencing. It means that livestock wander pretty much freely over a really wide area and will eat everything in sight. Goats, in fact, can climb trees. Now, when I taught this last year, they didn't believe me. So Google goats in trees. You'll find images of like 12 goats or more in one tree that has no leaves left on it. They've completely killed the tree because they've eaten everything. Now, if everything's been eaten, if there's no vegetation left, again, you've broken the water cycle. There'll be no transpiration coming off that vegetation anymore. So there's less moisture in the air, fewer clouds form, and there's even less precipitation. So you're creating this really bad feedback loop of less and less and less rainfall. More and more and more land is going to turn to desert. Linked to that, you've also got poor farming methods. Again, due to lack of education, LIC farmers, what they'll often do is repeatedly farm the same area over and over again until the soil is exhausted of nutrients, and then they'll go on to another patch and do exactly the same. And that causes permanent damage to the nutrient levels in the soil. Nothing can regrow. The soil is permanently exhausted of nutrients. It's going to become dry and dusty and turn to desert, and you can't reverse it. The solution to that we do a lot in this country is something called crop rotation. So the area of land that you have, you divide it into different sections and you farm those different sections at different times of the year, or you farm one section for 1 year, move on to the next section for the next year, and it means that the other areas that aren't being used get a chance to rest, It's called leaving land to fallow. Nutrients will replenish and the soil moisture will replenish, and then you can farm it again. But they don't have the education of those techniques in LICs. They'll just farm it until it's completely exhausted of nutrients and it dries out and it's no use to anyone. And then they'll move on and do the exact same to another area. Finally, you've got deforestation. So they need to make a fire because it's really cold actually in the desert and in arid regions at night because there's no clouds to keep the warmth in that's come in during the day. It's all lost back up to the upper layers of the atmosphere. So it gets very, very cold at night. They need a fire. They need a fire to cook. They need building materials to make their homes. They don't have the money to buy these things, so they'll go out and cut down trees as fuel wood and as building materials. And again, you've broken the water cycle. So that same thing is going to become a problem. You've got no transpiration, less moisture in the air, fewer clouds form, and even less precipitation will fall. So yes, anticyclones can't be helped. But when you throw humans in the mix, climate change means anticyclones are becoming more intense, more often, and lasting longer. Overgrazing, poor farming methods, deforestation, we are making the problem far worse for ourselves in this region. But due to lack of education, they just don't realise. So pause the video here a minute. Make your book look like this slide. Subheading, images if you have them, your choice to leave a gap or leave them out if you don't, and make notes from what I've written here. Okay, so clearly something needs to be done to halt desertification, because otherwise all the land that these people are living on at the moment is going to turn to desert, and it's a permanent change. Can't reverse it. Where are these people going to go? How are they going to survive? How is the environment going to recover? Sustainable methods need to be put in place now to stop this tipping point from going any further. So if you remember, when it comes to sustainable, we're looking for a solution to the problem that is permanent. It solves the problem permanently without causing damage to people, the environment, or the economy. A kind of tick list to be familiar with when you're evaluating whether a project is sustainable for a low-income country, it needs to meet the following criteria. It needs to be simple, easy to fix technology. It's pointless giving low-income country farmers tractors and combine harvesters. It's way too expensive. They can't afford to refuel it. If it breaks down, they haven't got the knowledge to fix it. Linked to that, it needs to be cheap/affordable, even better if it's free. They don't have the money for long-term maintenance costs or initial high costs of outlay for expensive materials or crops. It needs to solve the problem permanently, as we mentioned, so that they're not reliant on further aid and further help. If it was a water issue, for example, you don't go giving them thousands of bottles of water once they've drunk it. It's gone. You sink a well down into the groundwater supply. They'll always have a supply of water then. Help the most vulnerable people that need it the most. So you could give grants and loans to an LIC till the cows come home, but it's quite likely that it won't filter down to the people that need it most. It gets distributed by the government and it doesn't always get directed at the most vulnerable people in those villages. So whatever you're going to do, you need to go in directly to the villages and help the villagers themselves. Not damage local traditions and cultures, not cost too much money, not have an impact on the environment, and where possible it needs to be small scale. So if you're talking about a water issue, don't go building a huge expensive dam project that's going to flood a massive area of land to create the reservoir. It's going to need loads of concrete, loads of machinery, loads of technology. No, not appropriate. A small scale well solves the same issue. You've now got a permanent water supply, but it's far easier to do and more appropriate for low-income communities. So we're going to look at 4 possible sustainable solutions to try and halt desertification and to tackle the problems that come with drought and desertification, the crops dying, people starving, dirty water, etc., etc. If you want to write this list down, it could be quite a good idea to refer back to actually. So put a heading, sustainable solutions, and put this list down. And pause the video here to do that, and then we'll move on. Okay, so here are the 4 methods that we're going to look at. Okay, now if you want to do them in a table format like this, you can. We're going to evaluate each one, which, remember, it means weigh up the advantages and disadvantages, what's good and bad about each one. Now, if you've got the images printed out, you might want to put an extra little column in, maybe in between here, that says pictures or something, so you can cut and stick the images. But if not, don't worry, okay? So we're going to look at some slides of information that tell you what is each project, what are each of these ideas all about, how do they work, what are the advantages, are they affordable, do they use simple technology, are they small scale, do they benefit people and the environment, all of the things, the tick list that we looked at on the previous slide, or not, do they not meet that tick list, okay? So you're going to sort of want to keep this in the back of your mind when you're looking at the information to fill in the table. Okay, take a whole page turn sideways, draw out this table. If you're going to do it in table format, you could do subheadings and lay it out differently if you prefer, but leave yourself plenty of space. This column can be quite skinny. It'll only have maybe like 1 sentence in it. I'm hoping these two will have 2 or 3 bullet points for each one, so make them much wider. And as usual, when we're making notes like this, note-taking format is fine. So for example, I'm going to show you the Great Green Wall first. An advantage would be more vegetation equals more transpiration equals, so it's fine to use equal signs and dashes and stuff. Pause the video here a minute, turn a page sideways, set out this table. Okay, so first up, the Great Green Wall. Now, I touched upon at the start the fact that the countries in the Sahel region don't politically really see eye to eye. And when you've got a large-scale project like this, that's going to be a problem. The idea with the Great Green Wall, it runs 7,775 kilometres from west to east across the entire Sahel region, covering an entire area of nearly 12 million hectares. All right, it's basically a tree planting. It's an afforestation scheme. Now, on the one hand, afforestation is great. If you're planting saplings, baby trees, it's affordable, it's simple, you're creating a habitat, essentially. You're increasing transpiration, that's going to put more moisture into the air, more clouds, more precipitation, great. In addition, the canopy of leaves will shade the soil from the baking hot sun so it doesn't dry out as quickly, and the roots will help it to hold together as well, so there's less soil erosion. But international cooperation is very difficult for a project this size. This is pretty large scale. And you're running the risk of, in the long run, unless you're going to police it, locals in the area will come along and cut it down for fuel wood and for building materials, like I said earlier. So upsides and downsides. Pause the video here a minute. Use what I've said and what's on this slide to fill in the table for this solution. Okay, the next one is drought-resistant crops. These are exactly what it says on the tin. The majority of crops will die if the rainfall doesn't arrive for 1 year, but there are certain crops that are more drought-resistant naturally, and you can then genetically engineer them. You can genetically modify them using science in a laboratory to make them last even longer with little to no precipitation. Things like millet and sorghum, that's how they work. This will increase crop yield because these crops can survive up to 3 years with little to no precipitation. Now that's going to mean an increased yield of 50% or more. I think it equates to, for a certain region, up to £4 million worth of extra export income from selling these crops, which would increase the standard of living for local farmers. That additional income could be used to benefit the wider community as well. You could send your children to school, because as soon as they can read and write, they can lead a life that isn't governed by poverty. They can get a better job, perhaps in the tertiary or even quaternary sectors. And you can invest the money in local community projects as well, maybe building a well to help solve the issue of contaminated water supply. So it could be quite a nice self-perpetuating long-term knock-on idea, because people will start earning more money, but they are more expensive to buy in the short term. which means that they may be unaffordable in the first place for the majority of LIC farmers. And even these crops will die if the rains don't arrive within 3 years. Some countries in the Sahel, Mali in particular, has been suffering from drought for, you're approaching the 4 years plus mark now. And this is what we call monoculture. It's fields and fields and fields of the same crop, which isn't very good for the environment, and they can be more susceptible to being wiped out by pests. So if a swarm of locusts or something came through here, you're probably going to lose the lot. And farmers in LICs tend to, as it were, put all their eggs in one basket. This will be their only cash crop. So if it gets wiped out, they've got nothing to fall back on. Pause the video here a minute. Use this slide and what I've just said to help you fill in the next row of the table. Okay, next one, either tether or fence in the livestock. So teach local farmers a skill. Teach them how to make stone walls, how to make wooden fencing. It's a relatively affordable and simple thing to do using natural materials. So it's quite good for the environment. It's quite economically sustainable because it's relatively cheap. And it will stop the livestock from wandering too far. So we now reduce overgrazing and reduce soil erosion from when the hooves trample it and break it up and it then gets blown or washed away. So nutrients stay in the soil, vegetation remains intact. And the skill set that you've given the farmers, teaching them how to build a stone wall, they could then perhaps seek alternative employment as builders or something like that. So that could increase their income and boost their standard of living. However, the wood to build the fences has got to come from somewhere. And it's likely going to come from cutting down trees in the surrounding area. And then you've got the problem of deforestation again, which breaks the water cycle. Plus, if you're restricting animals to a smaller area, that area will get overgrazed quite quickly. And you'll then have to move them to another area. So like I mentioned, crop rotation earlier, you can do the same with livestock rotation. So build a few different paddocks over the area that you own and move your animals between them so the land has a chance to recover in between. Pause the video here a minute. Use this slide to help you fill in the third row of your table. Okay, and finally, the last idea is stone walls. You'll be pleased to see there's less writing on this slide. This is probably one of the most sustainable options. There's very few downsides here. You basically go around gathering stones, and in an arid region, there's plenty of them, and you build little mini walls that run at right angles to the direction of the slope. So when the rains do arrive, what tends to happen is because the soil is so baked hard by the sun during the drought, there's no infiltration. The rain doesn't soak in. It just hits the soil and runs straight off, taking a lot of the soil with it. So what these stone walls do is they block the path of the surface runoff, trapping the surface runoff just long enough to allow it to soak back into the soil, to recharge the moisture in the soil. In addition, all of the surface runoff, the particles that it's carrying of soil that it's eroded, it will block that soil erosion as well. So it keeps the nutrients in the area, keeps the soil in the area. So it traps the moisture, it traps the nutrients, it traps the soil. That's what you need to maintain agriculture in the area. So your crop yields won't drop too much, your income won't drop too much. This is super simple, affordable, pretty much free technology. The only downside really is this is pretty back-breaking work in the boiling hot sun. And really, although we said small scale is better, you can't build them over miles and miles of farmland. It would just take forever. So for the last row on your table, pause the video here a moment and use this to help you fill that row in. Okay, and you'll be pleased to know that is lesson 5 done. Now, I am aware that this lesson has been very, what we call didactic. That means that there's just been a lot of me saying this, writing that, and then you just copying it down. Unfortunately, with distance learning, there's quite often not much of an alternative to that, but I'll try to mix it up as much as we can. So today we've covered what causes drought and how that affects people and the environment. One of the main effects of drought being desertification, and how humans make desertification worse through deforestation, overgrazing and poor farming techniques and climate change, and how potentially we could use some methods to sustainably reduce desertification, because if it happens across too wide an area, we can't reverse it, and it's going to displace hundreds of thousands of people, and where are we going to put them? Population growth and overcrowding is already a problem. So as usual, if you have any questions or queries, please just drop me an email, gleasona@hubcymru.net. Next lesson, we're going to look at factors affecting climate. So I'll see you then in lesson 6.